welcome to myGSPN Sports Talk. You're here with your host, Robert Brown. And just like everyone in this country, we love football, love college football, loves what it stands for. And we're 2 weeks into the season. And, we've had a couple things shake up in the top 25 rankings in both the AP and coaches poll. So let's start our show today with diving into those top 25 rankings. For your top 25 AP coaches poll, no question it's Alabama. Alabama's been number one for a while, winning the national championship last year. Having been in the past couple national championships. Alabama had 54 first place votes in the AP poll, which, rightfully so. They deserve to be number one. Clemson right behind them at number 2, got 6 first place votes. I was okay with Alabama getting every last one of these first place votes, but, Clemson can have some. We have number 3, Georgia, 4, Ohio State. That basically, I could see that being the teams that go on to the college football playoffs. Clemson, Alabama, they've been there the past couple years competing against each other for the national championships. Georgia was in the playoffs last year. They had a phenomenal game against Baker Mayfield and Oklahoma. Got to the championship, and, they weren't able to beat Alabama, but then again, it's Alabama. Ohio State, they'll have one game left without Urban Meyers. Hasn't really affected them too much. They're 2-0 right now, and deservingly so. They've got more talent than the people that they're playing against. So for Ohio State to be number 4 in both the AP and coaches polls, I think it is correct. Right now, nothing changes in these polls until we get to number 10, where we've got Penn State in the coaches poll and Washington in the AP poll. I lean a little more towards Washington, like the AP poll has. Just the Pac-12 is a much better conference right now. Even with the things that have happened with Penn State in the past couple years, even before all of the struggles and Joe Pa, the Pac-12 has been coming on super strong like they were some years ago. With the emergence of USC a couple years ago with the Reggie Bushes and everybody. But, if I had to pick a conference that's clearly not the SEC in football, Pac-12 is probably that next dominant conference as far as, multiple good teams in it. Staying with the AP, we've got 11 is Penn State, 12 is LSU, 13 is Virginia Tech. Congratulations, Virginia Tech. 14 West Virginia, 15 TCU. We continue down the list with Mississippi State, Boise State. UCF is at number 18 in the AP poll. Michigan is at number 19. Oregon, Miami, USC, Arizona State, Oklahoma State, and Michigan State to round out the top 25. As far as the AP is concerned, there was 2 teams that dropped out, the number 24 and number 25 ranked team. South Carolina and Florida both being SEC teams. Florida being a traditional powerhouse, but they've been on a decline recently. As we go back to the coaches top 25, we'll start at 11 being Virginia Tech, 12 is Washington, 13 is LSU, 14 is TCU, 15 is West Virginia, 16 is Mississippi State, 17 is Boise State. UCF is 18 in both these polls. Then we've got Oklahoma State at 19, Miami at 20, USC at 21, Michigan's down at 22nd, Oregon at 23rd, Michigan State at 24th, Arizona State at 25. Now that we've talked about the top 25 polls that we've had so far, we're going to dive into a couple of these teams. As we started off saying, we've got Alabama that sits atop both the AP and coaches polls, and if we had the BCS still around, they'd probably be on top of the BCS as well. For Alabama, this is kind of the year of 2 quarterbacks working well. We all know about Jalen Hurts and what he was able to do last season. He had a phenomenal year. Every game, basically, he had a great game until the first half of the national championship game where he was replaced by Tagovailoa. Probably pronounced that name a little bit wrong, but, the kid came in and he's a much better pocket passer. Jalen Hurts seems to be more of a playmaker, a traditional Alabama quarterback. He'll hand the ball off. He's very, consistent with his footwork. Will get the ball out really fast and, not too many reads. But Tagovailoa, when you look at him, he sits back in the pocket. He's a lefty, so that's a little bit different. He surveys the field different. He's extremely accurate, has a very good arm. So, it's two different styles where Hurts will run a little bit more and create that way. Tagovailoa is going to sit back in the pocket. But both quarterbacks for Alabama played absolutely fantastic. Tagovailoa went 13 for 19, 228 yards and 4 touchdowns. Jalen Hurts came in and fumbled the ball his very first play, but bounced back. He's been through a lot. To see him, continue to grind even after coming in, not starting and turning the ball over that very first play on a fumble, or that very first possession, I'm sorry. He came back and went 7 for 7, 93 yards and 2 touchdowns. So, he didn't get scrub minutes. He was in the game during the second quarter, during the third quarter, but Tagovailoa, right now may be what Alabama needs as a passer. But with Hurts sitting in the sidelines, he's a backup right now. Do you bring in SEC Offensive Player of the Year from the year before to be your starting quarterback, or do you just let him be the veteran voice that is on the sideline helping the young sophomore quarterback out? Either way, this isn't a situation where you have two quarterbacks fighting against each other and the team is struggling. The team doesn't know whose voice to listen to. This is a situation you get into a lot when the coach won't make a decision on who your starting quarterback is going to be for the year. I haven't seen this work out, really ever in college football, but right now Alabama seems to have the right mindset. Saban, of any coach, if they can get it done, it can be Saban. I remember a few years ago, I want to say 2008, Tim Tebow's freshman year with Florida. It was him, it was Chris Leak. Tebow was the future, but Chris Leak was a much better pocket passer at the time. And, throughout their careers, Chris Leak was clearly not as athletic as Tim Tebow, but a much better pocket passer. So he played, and Tebow would come in to throw a little bit of a wrinkle. That situation worked. This is even different because you have two quarterbacks who, currently are evenly matched, and you've got a guy that came in and played a half to win a national championship that now starts the year over the SEC Offensive Player of the Year. So, it's an interesting situation out in Tuscaloosa, but, if anyone can figure it out, it's Nick Saban. We go on to number 2, and we talk about Clemson. Same situation with Clemson. Less of, it being up in the air, which quarterback is better, which quarterback will start. Clemson has their quarterback, and Bryant, and he'll continue to be their quarterback. But Trevor Lawrence, the number 1 player, that came out of high school this past year, he's ready. He looks phenomenal. He looks every bit of the phenom that everyone talked about. His very first play against Texas A&M. This is, his first time playing against a real big team. You start your seasons off usually against somebody small. If you're not going to do like the Virginia Tech, where you play Florida State, where you play a Boise State, where you play a Alabama as your first game every year. So you can't really count Clemson's first game. It wasn't that important. It wasn't against anybody that big. But Texas A&M is a strong SEC team with a very good coach in Jimbo Fisher. But Trevor Lawrence, first pass, went 64 yards for a touchdown. And you can see everything that they've talked about him for the past couple years coming out of high school. He is the real deal. And I think he'll be, a huge piece this year for Clemson, hopefully getting into that playoffs and maybe moving on to the national championship. I don't know if they can do it, but he's definitely someone like a Tebow, where it's a completely different wrinkle from Kelly Bryant, their original quarterback. So this should be a nice, not really a dilemma, but a good thing for Clemson when they can throw both quarterbacks out there and they both know their role, they both know their place, and they perform well. Now this was probably the best game of the day. Texas A&M played absolutely phenomenal, had a chance to win it, and ended up throwing an interception on the 2-point conversion try that would have tied the game up to force it into overtime. So Alabama and Clemson both, come away with victories in this week and remain 1-2, both still having, their quarterback issues that they've had the past couple past couple weeks, and will continue to happen. I guess Alabama's had them since the second half of the national championship last year. Now we want to talk about our in-state schools real quick before we go on. We'll start with UF. This is a very depressing time for Florida football. We've been on a decline for a while. Especially when we had Urban Meyer and we were competing for those national championships, not too long ago, but recently they haven't been doing the greatest, and this is probably the low point in my opinion. This is the first loss to the University of Kentucky in 31 games. So, this is definitely the lowest point Florida football has been in the past couple years. Even when we weren't performing well and playing well, we were still beating Kentucky. This isn't basketball. Kentucky should not be beating University of Florida in football. A 31-game win streak was one of the longest in the country. That comes to an end. And, Florida football this year may need to start looking for next year. We're losing in Kentucky, and when we get into the meat of the SEC season, we've got to go to Jacksonville and play Georgia. We've got to go to Knoxville and play Tennessee. We've got to, match up against some of these big-time schools, and then we end the year with Florida State. We've definitely got to step things up. It's not looking great for Florida football. On the flip side, there's Florida State. I'm not a Florida State fan. I've never been a Florida State fan, but they've been the dominant team in Florida the past couple years, ever since Jameis Winston. They've also started to decline with the loss of Jimbo Fisher. It's a younger team that they've got there, and they actually lost this past, or their opening week. They lost to the Virginia Tech Hokies, who look absolutely phenomenal, and we'll get to them in a minute. But they had a bounce-back win against Samford, 36-26. They didn't look the greatest. Again, it's Samford, not Stanford in California. This is Samford in Birmingham, Alabama. They didn't look great playing against a team that they should have demolished. There's really not much to say about them. I really expect them to continue to get better as the year goes on. The ACC is not the SEC, so they've got a chance to turn their season around, unlike Florida, who, if you're losing to Kentucky, they're not going to be a team competing for the championship in the SEC, competing for a number 1 or 2 seed in either conference or either side of the SEC. So Florida's in trouble. Florida State, I think that they can get back and they can keep going. Miami, on the other hand, Miami didn't really play anybody, but they definitely went and got them a 77-0 win against Savannah State. This is exactly what you're supposed to do. This is exactly what Florida State was supposed to do. It's a nice bounce-back win for Miami to get them, 1-1 right now for the season and have them, the right footing moving on to week 3. Hopefully they'll continue to get stronger. I've got them a little bit ahead of Florida State as far as, bouncing back and continuing to play well. They're both 1-1, but if you look at week 2, if you look at what they did the last season, right now I've got to give the nod to Miami. On top of that, people would be very remiss if I didn't speak on UCF. I don't have too much information on that other than they continue to win, so we've got to continue to give them credit. They're currently ranked number 18 in both the AP and coaches polls, so I can definitely see those rankings moving up. I can see them taking the place of a Washington, something like that, as 1-1, with them being 2-0 and having won their past 17, 18, 19 games, something like that. So UCF, while I do not think that they were the national champions last year because they didn't go to the playoffs, they didn't win the national championship game, they're a deserving team to be on this list and to definitely be higher at 2-0 for the season and what they did last year. Now, the last topic of discussion is Virginia Tech. Now, we talked about some SEC schools with Miami, with Florida State. Virginia Tech's already beat Florida State, and that's usually their toughest rival football-wise throughout the year. They look absolutely phenomenal. After beating Florida State 24-3, they followed that up by a 62-17 blowout of William & Mary. Now, again, just like Savannah State, just like Samford, William & Mary, we expect blowouts in these games. Virginia Tech, after they handled a high-quality team in Florida State the first game of the season, which is very difficult to do. They came back and continued that upward momentum and demolished William & Mary. So it's going to be Clemson, Virginia Tech, and the ACC, in my opinion. Clemson's looking absolutely fantastic, and Virginia Tech, with Bud Foster's defense and the way this offense is moving the ball around, I can see them getting to another ACC championship and, hopefully bringing the title back to Blacksburg and being the team that moves on from the ACC into the College Football Championship Series. Well, thank you for tuning in. We'll be back next week for a lot more information, and tune in tomorrow for our live myGSPN show. Again, this is your host, Robert Brown, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.